Welcome back. I hope you've used your break fruitfully, whether to talk with your fellow participants, have a stretch, have a walk, have a coffee, because this next session is one that I've been looking forward to. This is about the future food makers, the next generation who are going to be driving the sustainability of our food systems. They're going to talk about the menu for change. We're going to hear a lot about what they want to see coming up in the coming years, what they want to hear from the policymakers, what they want to hear from industry. So do stay tuned for that. It's Sarah Raversi is also going to be moderating this one again. Just to remind you, everyone, that you can share your questions. You can share using the hashtag FutureFood21. And of course, you can use the networking tools after this session to reflect on what you've heard. But let me welcome back Sarah from the Future Food Institute. Sarah, take it away. I'm really looking forward to this discussion you have.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited. Actually, in the previous panel, we were talking about commitments and what is needed to turn our commitments into actions and impacts. Now we're going to talk about the future with the best representative from Gen Z. And actually, I think that really with their voices, we're going to hear how really we can become more impactful and what's going to be the future we all want to see. So I'm not alone, of course, and I have a great series of panelists together with me, and I want to involve here on stage with me Chloe Dorin. She's going to be with me a little bit leading this session, and of course we're going to hear more about your ideas and the solutions we can put in place to see those goals achieved at the end. We know we don't have time. 2030 is tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So hello, everyone. My name is Chloe. And today with Sasha, Carrie, Emilia, and Ricard, we would like to answer the question, what do young people expect from the future food system? The other day, my friend, who is 24 years old and who recently gave birth, confessed to me, Chloe, actually, I'm afraid for the future of my child. I think fear is a legitimate feeling for all the youth. Actually, 8 in 10 young people think we need to take urgent action to make the way we produce and consume food more sustainable. Therefore, we would like you, audience, to have a reflection on the current reality of the food system by asking you the question. Could you launch the poll, please? Do you think our food system can feed 10 billion people by 2050? We'll wait a little bit so I can also receive the results and comment.
Chloe, since 2015, this has been always the big question. Every conference was asking how might we're going to feed those 10 billion people. So this is, I think, one of the most relevant issues. Doing it.
And this is definitely why we're addressing it, for sure. Yeah.
I'm curious to see what our audience is going to say.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait. Okay, so actually, majority of you, 66%, have said, oh, sorry, now 64. We have some people who decided to come with the optimism side. Okay, versus pessimism, optimism. Well, us, the 10 Future Food Maker, we decide and we choose to be optimistic. That is why 2 months ago, the 10 of us decided to embark on this journey to fight for the future food system and ultimately to fight for our future. We understand the complexity of this issue, and that is why we addressed it in a systematic, multidisciplinary approach because healthy people, societies, and planets are interconnected in multiple ways. We will present our demand following the EU Farm to Fork EU strategy, starting first with regenerative agriculture, which has a huge environmental and climate impact that also improves opportunities for food accessibility and well-being, and finally to close the loop with reducing food waste. So instead of feeling hopeless, we choose to use our voices and passion to raise the needs for the future food system. And I'll hand over to you back, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Chloe. I think we have a video because I really would love to jump into the conversation with a clear idea in mind of what are the projects. So let's go with the video.
I strongly believe that my voice is powerful and can move others to take action.
What I would love to see the most from the industry is action and compromise.
There's a lot of amazing solutions, but we need to implement them and we have to be the change.
I think the puzzle of finding the best possible solutions to the sustainability problems we are facing today is incredibly interesting.
The combination of food, sustainability, and entrepreneurship means absolutely everything.
I, like the majority of young people in Europe, want to see more qualitative information in education on nutrition.
I'm convinced that together we can enter a new chapter of changing the perception of waste and building a resilient agri-food sector.
The ongoing investment by industry and governments in research, development and innovation will help to ensure that our food system can meet the demands and needs of the world's growing population.
If we're talking about the future, we should look at the upcoming generation and ensure that they grow up with the right mindset.
Thank you so much. Actually, through your voice, we really understand what's your commitment, but also what I see here is a lot of knowledge, skills, science, youth rooted in science, where actually this is the starting point if we want to achieve the goals, because science is everything. So I'm super curious because now there is an interesting manifesto that is going to inspire us, I think, on taking a step forward and becoming really more impactful. So, Chloe, I think we can now start to give the voice to our friends. So I want to start with the first guest. So Sasha, I invite you to jump on stage. Chloe was highlighting the topics. I think you picked the most relevant issues we are facing. True cost accounting. Let's start from there.
Yes. So first we're starting with regenerative agriculture, and I wanted to thank Chloe for the introduction. Within the first initiative of the Menu for Change, we recommend to target 25% of EU agricultural land to be managed under regenerative practices by 2030. Agricultural production uses almost 40% of the land in the EU, with 20 million jobs dependent on the agricultural sector. Unsustainable practices have led to widespread soil degradation, with 80% of areas moderately or severely eroded being agricultural lands or natural grasslands. This erosion leads to carbon loss, biodiversity loss, and increased flooding risks. Currently, the European Commission's Farm to Fork strategy sets a goal for 25% of agricultural land to be organic by 2030. And despite the Commission focusing on soil restoration in the EU soil policy, at the EU level, there is no binding overarching framework that strategically defines policy priorities or parameters for soil protection. To increase sustainability of agriculture, we, the Future Food Makers, call on the European Commission and national policymakers to first establish an EU soil regeneration policy that mandates the development of regional 5-year roadmaps for the implementation of regenerative practices, annual monitoring of regenerative practice implementation, and provision of regional funds for transition to regenerative practices and related innovation. Second, we call to establish an EU training body that trains existing farmers and the next generation of farmers to engage in regenerative agricultural practices by providing affordable, inclusive, and regional training opportunities. The training should have a comprehensive syllabus that includes, but is not limited to, regenerative practices, holistic decision-making, farming with nature, and opportunities in agritech. So now we can move into our next recommendation, that within true cost accounting. This is to develop a true cost implementation system across the mass production food value chain by 2030. In order to achieve a more affordable and transparent food system, the true cost of food must be made visible. Currently, the environmental, social, and human costs, known as externalities of food production, are hidden from the consumers. They're hidden in costs such as the taxes and subsidies, and inconsequential costs such as biodiversity loss and environmental degradation caused by poor practices within the food sector. Finally, they're hidden in healthcare costs because of our unhealthy diets. In fact, the cost of externalities is estimated to be more than double the price of the food we consume, meaning consumers are sometimes unknowingly paying more for their food than they anticipate to. Therefore, to improve transparency and allow consumers to make more informed food purchasing decisions, we call on the European Commission and national policymakers to develop an EU-wide true cost of food policy that first mandates the calculation of the true cost of food products produced by medium-large corporations and multinationals through the implementation of life cycle analysis and impact assessments. Then include mechanisms that contribute to the mitigation of externalities and transition to improved practices or products, ensuring vulnerable social groups are not put at risk. Thirdly, provide a framework to ensure the quantification of externalities is accurate and consistent. And finally, mandate the establishment of national working groups to monitor, advise, and advocate for true cost accounting implementation among businesses, and to support related educational activities for consumers. So now I would like to invite Carrie to speak about nutrition.
Thank you, Sasha. The true cost of products considers the social and environmental impact. However, we also need to talk about the impact on our health. Think about how much sugar you eat per day. We all know sugar is not necessarily healthy, but whether you meet the daily recommended allowance depends on which European nutrition guideline you're looking at. For example, people in Germany could be right in the target, whereas people from Malta would consume more than double of the recommendation, although it's the same amount and the same risk for nutrition-related disease. This is confusing, isn't it? Therefore, 75% of young people in Europe want a clear message on what is a healthy and balanced diet. To ensure the accessibility of health and nutrition information, we call on the European Commission level policymakers and health agencies to define EU uniform nutrition guidelines that are easy, accessible, and are based on dietary reference values to meet individual needs. These guidelines should be created by EU nutrition and public health experts and consider the impact of traditional culture, as well as local and available foods. These guidelines could be informed by the planetary health diet from the EIT Lancet Commission, which emphasizes a predominantly plant-based diet and sets uniform limits and recommendations for foods such as sugar, salt, saturated fat, meat, fish, dairy, fruit and vegetables, and fiber to ensure good health and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. As part of the solution, these EU nutrition guidelines should be the base for food labels that include aspects of sustainability and the impact on the environment. We need food labels that provide information that goes beyond just ingredients. As I said, we all know products high in sugar are not the best for our health, but most products are also not the best for the environment. Thus, in order to increase transparency on food sustainability, we call on the European Commission level policymakers and health agencies to introduce a specific EU food labeling system with accessible information on the nutritional value of the product, but also includes its environmental impact. Therefore, environmental labeling trials such as the Foundation Earth project should be supported by the EU and expanded to more EU countries to encourage further uptake and research. Furthermore, this could be supported by a QR code labeling strategy that is accessible for everyone with educational resources and transparent details about the product's farm-to-fork journey using reliable technologies such as blockchain. And now I'm going to hand over to Emilia.
Thank you, Kari. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So accessibility to nutrition information ensures the knowledge on what to eat, but it does not target the affordability of those foods. Approximately 3 billion people worldwide lack the financial means to access the least cost healthy diets recommended by national governments. Factors such as origin country, economic power, and education level are all barriers to good health, and therefore increase the concentration of diet-related illnesses in underprivileged communities. To increase inclusion and support these communities, we call on the EU to develop an inclusion policy that pays special attention to more discriminated collectives. Our demand includes creation of a voucher distribution initiative for healthy foods, which can be used to support hungry, food insecure, and vulnerable populations. The special focus should be on community-based health interventions, such as communal gardens, which provide education programs to support these groups towards healthier habits. Next slide, please. When talking about underprivileged communities, one of the most important changes that we need to accomplish are regarding food waste, because throwing away food can be compared to stealing from the table from vulnerable populations. More than 1/3 of all produced food in the world is lost or wasted, yet rates of food production are sufficient to feed more than 800 million people that go hungry every year. We have identified that supermarkets are the contact point both for the consumers and other stakeholders in the rest of the food value chain. This means supermarkets have a role to play in setting an example and influencing up and down the food chain towards reducing waste. To accomplish this, we call on national supermarkets in Europe to develop food waste reduction monitoring plans that feed into the existing EU regulation framework. To help achieve this, we have identified a supermarket scorecard system that could be implemented. The system should follow the hierarchy of food waste, transparently tracking how much effort and resources are being put into waste reduction, food donations, composting, and other related activities. Based on the score, the supermarket could capitalize its positive actions in tax rewards or credits. The second measure we propose regarding reduction of food waste is to accelerate bio-based substitutes in order to replace fossil fuel-based materials. Even though this already is one of the 14 actions in the bioeconomy strategy, more effort needs to be put in promotion and investments in upcycling and reducing bio-waste. Additionally, this strategy has to be expanded to all European countries, since so far only 11 have developed their national bioeconomy strategies. And now, last but not least, Ricard will explain our final demand regarding food education.
Thanks, Emilia. We think that everyone here knows by now that the impact of nutrition on people's health, and as well as the impact of diet on the environment, needs to be viewed hand in hand. Therefore, nutrition guidelines based on people's emission targets should be made accessible to everyone. To tackle health inequalities, we call on the European Commission and education authorities from every European country to introduce the nutritional, health, and environmental implications of food as subjects in education curriculums for children. This should also include topics in regard to the whole food chain from production to consumption, and also on food waste. It is to mention that this training should be provided in interesting and engaging ways to ensure it has pierced into children's day-to-day life. But this shouldn't be just focused on children. We should be providing up-to-date training and resources for both teachers and parents about food nutrition and sustainability. On the other hand, ensuring mental health is also taken into consideration in food education. Healthy lifestyles are not just limited to physical health, and this should be reflected in school curriculums across Europe to prevent the early appearance of eating disorders and body shape stigma. We believe that by educating the whole population in food sustainability will surely be a key approach to reduce obesity taxes across Europe and to decrease the prevalence of other cardiovascular diseases, as well as to improve our climate emergency situation. And now I give back the mic to Chloe to sum it all up for you.
Could you change also the slide, please? Thank you very much. So this diagram that we all see illustrates the interconnection of our calls to action in a systemic approach rather than silo. To conclude, we want first the production of our food to use regenerative practices so that our soil can become resilient to climate change. Secondly, transparent labels that consumers can trust towards their health and their consciousness towards the environment, meaning positive or negative impact is communicated in company reports and in food labels. Thirdly, the food system requires urgent action and innovation across the value chain. We want to ensure no one is left behind, meaning manufacturers, farmers, retailers, governments, NGO, without forgetting vulnerable communities. And finally, to do justice to food waste, including your banana, which doesn't look good. Mine looks good, I know, but sometimes they become black, right? And these goals, we know that they cannot be achieved without these tools around in darker green. It is like wanting to put an IKEA shelf together without the instruction and the screws. The food system plays a central part in our societies, culture, and environment. New generation need to be actively involved. We, us, the 10 future food makers, representing the new generation, decide to step up. Will you step up?
I will. And I want to support you. Actually, you have been really highlighting which are the steps we have to follow, starting from the most important one, that is regenerative ag. That is not just a practice, it's a way of thinking. Thinking in a regenerative way needs to become our way of thinking and conceiving life. And you're ending with education. That is the starting point. If we don't invest in education, we can achieve nothing. So from schools to industries to farms, long life learning and being constantly open to get inspired and train ourselves, it's, I think, a key message. I think we have tons of questions from the audience now. So I invite our audience to write and type questions. I have plenty of questions for you, of course, guys. And I see a bright future if the future is going to be also on your hands as well. So what is, from your perspective, the most important action that you can take as young people to drive change? But I would say I address this question to you, but it's also for me at the end. But you, as young people, what do you think is the starting point?
I would say that these kind of activities and opportunities such as EIT has provided for us are really important to raise our voices and to drive change and ultimately it unites people, the young people that have same visions regarding the future food system. But also I think that the 10 of us agree that the terms sustainability, green changes, and similar terms are kind of being exploited in the sense that there's too much talking about it and too little concrete action in real life are taken. So I would say the number one recommendation is to start taking actions, even the smallest one, they all matter. I know that sometimes it is a little bit overwhelming with the amount of change we need to implement in our day-to-day lives. But nevertheless, I would suggest to start from the topics that you really feel passionate about. Even the 10 of us, we care deeply about different topics, to start from those. And not only that you will make the change, but you will also influence the rest and your surroundings to do the same. So if we all do this, we're on a great path to achieve a positive impact. And to summarize my long answer, I would say not just for young people, but for all people to be the change you want to see in this world.
Thank you, Emilia. Thank you so much. Someone else want to pick this question? So we have many actually coming from the audience. I will start with the first one, if you agree, because I think that talking about farmers and the roles that plays people working in agriculture is crucial. So we have Christina here saying, what incentives can I set to involve more young people in agricultural projects like agricultural cooperatives so that young people are more motivated to join an agricultural project? Because this actually was a question that came up also in the previous panel. So we need to engage more youth joining the farming industry that is anyway made by technology, science. We need knowledge in agriculture. What's your perspective? Do you have any suggestion?
Maybe I can jump in. So I had the opportunity to speak with the permanent secretary of the Ministry of the Environment, of the Ministry of Education of Cyprus in September. And we actually were having this sort of conversation about when the disinterest between sustainability and agriculture arises with young people. And what he said that he had found was that youth start to become more disinterested with these sorts of topics at adolescence. Because when you think about this from the perspective of a young person, the concept of where food comes from is really cool, because at the end of the day, you get to eat it and enjoy it and celebrate around it. So I think we really need to focus on starting these conversations with young people, very young people at a young age, integrating agriculture in with education initiatives inside the schools so that we spark that interest and continue to develop the interest so that they don't lose it when they start to become more involved with other activities.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And starting from education in agriculture, I want to pick the second question. That is, I think, the big challenge. We were talking about how might we're going to feed the 10 billion people in a regenerative way, I would add to this question. Because here we have Mabel asking, I recently read that changing agriculture in regard to regenerative and organic production is not compatible with our current food consumption patterns to feed everyone. I'm interested in your solution and options on changing food consumption pattern to actually have to change and enable sustainable agriculture. So this is the big question. And I'm very fascinated about this topic because we all want to support the industry to change their procurement models and to change. There are industries that are really setting very high standards and they want to make this change happen. What's your perspective?
Maybe as one of the people that worked on the regenerative agriculture policy, I can take this again. So I'll primarily focus in this question on regenerative agriculture because we didn't involve a policy surrounding organic production. When we look at the chart at the end that Chloe was presenting, I think that the question that arises is absolutely correct. The current way that we consume food is not suitable with regenerative agriculture, which is why we need to develop a new entire food system. We can't just change one thing. So that's why within our solution, we wanted everything to end in a way that was connected because we acknowledge that the way that we eat also affects the way that we plant and grow food. So at the end of the day, For example, the amount of meat that we consume in Europe is too much for what sustainable agriculture needs to look like. So we have to focus on education, we have to focus on nutrition, we have to focus on our consumption and waste habits in order for us to also focus on our agricultural habits as well.
Thank you so much, Sasha. So now you were mentioning nutrition, health. This is another crucial topic. And here we have a question from Rodi. He's asking actually if guidelines solve the problem that a lot of people do not have an idea of what is healthy, what is the concept of health and healthy food. So is the lack of knowledge not the problem? Do you think is everything connected to knowledge?
Well, that's definitely a good point. But we need nutrition guidelines as the base, and then use these guidelines to communicate and tell people what is healthy and not healthy through, for example, food labels that would be bring them right to the consumer on the product, but also through education in schools, in other facilities. But definitely the guidelines should be the base, because first we need to really define what is healthy, and also focus on other aspects such as their environmental impact.
Definitely, yes. And the environmental impact for sure is one of the drivers for choice. But anyway, to help consumer to better understand also what's really the impact of our choices is not so easy as well, because we are with communication creating a lot of confusion sometimes. So I want to go on with the questions that are arriving, and I invite you to keep going, typing your questions, because we want to hear more from you. Which are your pain points? Which are the things that are keeping yourself awake in the night? So I want to answer to the question of Anna, that she's basically saying, what a lesson from younger generation. So you are inspiring people now. I want to commend them for giving us not only a fantastic blueprint for action, but showing how fear can be transformed into hope. I'm always hopeful, but I think that you are also stating that there are some actions that need to be taken from the different perspective, from the farmer's perspective, the policymaker's perspective, the industry perspectives, SME perspective as well. So I want to hear what's your comment on that.
I'd like to go ahead if that's fine with you, and I'd love to hear more from you guys. But I think for sure, already as consumers, we can vote with our fork, and we are maybe individuals, and we think that we don't have that much power, but we do. We can definitely think about, where does my food come from? How long has it travel? Who made it? And how was the condition of that person working for my food? How much resources have been put into my food? How much water? How much pesticides? And we as consumer definitely can vote with our fork. On the other hand, for businesses, they definitely also have a bigger audience of customers and can definitely create value by creating more resilient business models and supply chain, but also protecting themselves from environmental and climate change. And on the other hand, can definitely think about how to cut costs, because eventually most of companies always think about how to cut costs. Well, I would say think about your food waste and loss and how can you reduce those, and think about how much can you have as an impact on an overall bigger picture.
That's touching an interesting point. Emilia.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm sure Emilia also, you might have an opinion on that. Sorry, Sarah.
No, I completely agree. I mean, we talked about this so much, but I completely agree. And action, that's my own main point today. We don't want this to end to be just another plan or suggestion or whatever. We have a bunch of those, but now is the time to act.
In the panel before, it came up that we need to anyway work to have a food that is going to be affordable, accessible, and of course also aspirational. Because at the end, if we wanted to drive consumers' choice, we need to match those 3A that are at the end the driving forces behind our choices. But actually, here we have another question from Giovanni that is actually forcing us to think about which are our biggest challenges, because he's saying when implementing change in your own daily life, in your own daily choices, to improve the sustainability of your food consumption and eat more healthy, what are the hardest choice you are confronted with? And this is, I think, what we are proving every time we are in front of the shelves or we have to make a food choice. So what's the most difficult to change in our daily choices, and what do you think, why?
Okay, I can jump in. Well, I can say for me, because of my culture, reducing meat can be the hardest one. But also, I try to not to blame myself. I don't want to be fully vegan, but if I just reduce a certain amount, I think that's a fair amount of change I'm making. So start with that, and then move on with other things and so on. So I think these small changes are important, but yeah, that is one of the hardest for me and my family.
I would also like to add a lot of people, also young people, because we start our career. Very often we are struggling between, okay, this is what I studied, this is what I want to do, how can I match this gap? I also thinking about which company you want to work for. Because when you work for a company that puts sustainability inside their goals, this is also where you can definitely have an impact, because your energy, your passion is put into work and can definitely move a whole company and whole decision makers in hearing what you think and driving those change in their product and in their services.
What you're saying is what is happening. Your generation is flipping upside down the process. Your generation is choosing where to go to work, and it's not anymore the company choosing you. So this is exactly what is happening every single day. But here we have another question that I think is pretty linked with what you are doing. So what's going to be the final outcome of your manifesto? Anna is asking us what are going to be the next steps for the future food makers, but also for the manifesto project. So are you thinking to go and spread the manifesto in the schools? Do you have in mind any actions in which also our audience can support?
Well, going into schools is definitely a good idea. But we definitely want to monitor the actions that are taken and changes that are happening after this conference and after the manifesto has been published for a while. We do know that actions take time, and we cannot really expect that, for example, food labels are introduced by tomorrow. But we want to continue to push for change until the demands are actually realized. I personally would love to reach out and get active on a national level and talk to politicians, since I believe our manifesto could inspire them as well. And as a group, we would love to keep working with EIT Food and recruit more young people to kick off the FutureFoodMaker movement, and also get active on social media. Yesterday, I was actually messaging Emilia that I feel like this is just the beginning, and we both feel that.
Yes, we all hear that. So last but not least, we were mentioning before, the transition we are facing now, it's a cultural transition before the energy transition. But there is another transition that we are facing. And here we have a question from Anne-Marie that is basically highlighting what is digitalization. So how do you think that this digitalization in the transition can play a crucial role in the food sector? Because anyway, to implement digitalization, we need to implement a different culture of adoption of technologies.
I think that this is a great question. To me, digitalization within the food sector means transparency. I think this plays a really good role with both our true cost accounting strategy and also our nutrition education strategy. Being able to provide accessible information to consumers and also to multinational corporations about where food is coming from, what the practices are going into the food, and also being able to provide more information for farmers on how to farm sustainably, ethically, how to treat the land well, and those sorts of things. So I think as we see more and more digitalization within the food sector industry, we can see a lot of the future shifts, I think, will be for the better, because we're going to be able to provide so much more information to everyone that's involved.
I would like to add, I think that the agriculture sector may be slower in implementing the digital technologies, but also on not only this pandemic, but before we knew that, but this pandemic accelerated the need of it. And I think that its role is also in increasing sustainability, as a bunch of those technologies can reduce the need for water, fertilizers, and optimize the production. So we don't really waste too many resources that don't need to be wasted.
Thank you so much. And I have just one last question. I think that this is one of the hot topics that are debated at the EU level. So we have Ellen asking you, what do you think about Nutri-Score? And if you think that Nutri-Score represents really the nutritional value of food we consume.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of controversy right now with Nutri-Score all across Europe, and actually here in Spain, where I am from. But, well, Nutri-Score could be another tool to add to the packaging of our food, but this wouldn't include the environmental impact as a labeling thing. So yeah, we think we should include the environmental impact in labeling and guideline policies, and maybe develop a QR code labeling strategy that would be accessible to everyone, and that it has also the resources and that it can be transparent with the details about the farm to fork journey of a food product. And it is true that the Nutri-Score doesn't have these aspects inside of it. It just reflects on the nutritional value with its algorithm, and also it doesn't take into account the food matrix that of the food. So it can be a useful thing, but now that we are talking about FOPL and front of packaging labeling and so, maybe we should find another one that is more complete and takes into account every aspect of this food product.
I agree with you, but I involved someone else to pick the question before we close the session.
I also think that the Nutri-Score just really lacks transparency and lacks other aspects as well, because food is not just nutrition. It involves just so many other factors. So we definitely need to find a different food label which just approaches all the aspects, such as the Foundation Earth project.
So thank you so much, guys. With your inspirations, with your ideas, with your manifesto, and also with your final thoughts about this topic, I think we have a lot of food for thought, and we can face the future together. So thank you so much for your work. I invite Jennifer because I know that we have an amazing agenda looking forward in the next hours. So we're going to debate more and more about those topics. And I want to thank this group of food makers representing a huge community, because you are actually representing a huge community all over Europe. And I have to thank EIT Food, because without EIT Food, we wouldn't be here together. And the work that has been done during these years shows that ecosystems are needed and partnerships are really crucial if we want to achieve the goals. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hand over to you, Jennifer.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for another great panel. And I was very impressed with the input and the enthusiasm that we've heard from the future food makers. We are going to stay with this topic because we're going to get the policymakers and industry perspective on this Generation Z menu for change, because we've heard a lot there. We've had questions from you, the audience. We very, very clearly heard that your messages are getting through, but there's a lot still to talk about. I think we could categorize this as a B+ for industry and for the EU policymakers. So let me introduce to you Claire Burry, Deputy Director General in DG Health and Food Safety within the European Commission. Claire, lovely to see you. We also have for this session Dirk Jacobs, Deputy Director General and Director of Consumer Information, Nutrition and Health at Food Drink Europe. Thank you both very much for being here. I know you were listening to that last panel. So Claire, let me start with you. There's 6 priority calls to action that have been set out in that call menu for change. Talk to me overall about what you thought, and then we'll come back and kind of dive into them one by one.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jennifer. It's great to be here. It's very nice to be here with Dirk, who is a, can I say partner in crime, no, from the Code of Conduct that we'll talk to you about. But anyway, it's very nice to be here. Thank you so much to the 10 young food makers. I think I was left feeling very optimistic if they're going to be in charge of policy in the future. They have a very clear idea where they want to go, very clear idea of sense of priorities, and they were incredible communicators, I found. So thank you very much for that. Thanks to Chloe, thanks to Amelia, Sasha, Ricardo, and Carrie. I think what I was impressed with was that they've understood the urgency of what's happening at the moment, that the clock is ticking, and that we need to make those changes, which are complicated. They recognise that, but also which need to be made all the way along the food chain. I heard that several times. But really also about empowering consumers and holding industry to account. So I think they really have a very good sense of where we should be going. Of course, I listened very carefully to some of the recommendations. We'll come back, I guess, Jennifer, on the details. And there are some things where we're doing something slightly differently, but I was very interested to hear the specific proposals. It was incredibly operational, I think, what they've done. They've come forward with some very specific proposals. But what I welcomed above all, I think, was their new thinking, their fresh thinking, their new way of looking at things. And I think also I would like to underline how important I feel they are as communicators. I mean, I have a teenager daughter. She's much more likely to listen to this group than she is to me. So they can talk to the younger ones. They were talking about going into school and so on, but they're also, I think, a bridge, right, between the younger and the older generation. So I just thought they were really fantastic, and I very much welcome this menu for change. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Indeed, communication was one of the issues that was highlighted earlier on in today's event, and it was pointed out that children often teach the parents sometimes in this regard. Dirk, overall, your general reaction before we get into the detail, please.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And also thank you to the future food makers for this inspiring menu that they have provided to us. And I'm also delighted to see that despite the challenges ahead, you see the glass half full. And I really like the expression from fear to hope. And I think that's very important, because if we are to give up already now, we will never get to where we want to be. And I've noted myself that by the time of my retirement age, and I'm a Gen Y, I'm a millennial, according to the definition, Europe should by then be the first climate neutral region in the world. And I hope that by that time we don't talk about neutrality anymore, but that we really talk, and we have been able to move together to climate positive and community positive. And when it comes to the food production and consumption, that is in sync with environment, people, and economies. And that's where the young people have an important role to play. There are enormous expectations on our sector from the young generation. We've seen that already in the presentation. You want to see progress ASAP, food that is produced more sustainably, viable solutions for packaging, a food offer that is nutritious, but also keeping the taste, the enjoyment, the affordability, having your occasional treat while you are having your Netflix and chill moments. So we have to bring all of that together. And that's a huge challenge, but also an opportunity for our sector. And we have to continuously reinvent ourselves to meet those increasing and evolving needs. And that can only be done also through innovation. And that's where we need the young, bright people like yourselves to come up with the creativity, especially given that we don't have all the solutions yet on how we will get there. So part of that is very radical disruption and new innovative business models, but a lot of it is also on continuous improvement. And again, we of course have a very high challenge, and you're setting the bar very high and keeping us sharp. But it is also about sort of making progress on your own, and we've been discussing that already in the previous session. I think for every generation, there will be a next generation that will be judging it on its progress and achievements. So if we have to deliver today, it will be you, the future food makers, the next generation, which will have to do even better tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to collaborate and talk more about the menu right now.
Thank you, Dirk. Right, let's start with this first target, Claire. 25% of EU agricultural land to be managed under regenerative practices by 2030. Now, the Commission's already set out a lot of very concrete targets with Farm to Fork. How do you feel that this call is something that might fit or is already supported by targets within the Farm to Fork strategy?
Okay, so indeed, Jennifer, as you say, there are several things in the Farm to Fork strategy. One that I wanted to mention just in starting is the sustainable use of pesticides, where there we're working on having more integrated pest management and promoting safer ways of protecting harvests and so on. And I mentioned that because hopefully we'll have a proposal on that beginning of next year. But what I liked, I think, about this proposal is in the Farm to Fork, we talk about 25% agricultural land. I think this reminds us that we need to go wider than that. We need to look at agricultural practices more generally. In November, and I think that this was referred to, there's a new EU soil policy which has been adopted, which I think recognises that this is an area where we need to go further and to do more. We've said that there will be by 2023 a soil health law, and I think this is very much, that will then very much go in the direction that the food makers, the young food makers are asking. On regenerative practices, what we said in November was that the soil strategy commits to prepare a set of sustainable soil management practices, including regenerative farming in line with the agroecological principles. And this would apply to a wide variety of soil ecosystems and identify some unsustainable soil management practices. So I think really this was a very, it hits the nail right on the head in terms of what they were proposing. I think it calls on us to go a bit further. One of the other things they asked for was an EU training body. And on that, we've said that there will be a network of excellence of practitioners and a network of sustainable soil ambassadors. Imagine that, I'd like to be a sustainable soil ambassador, I think, if I could ever reach that. But I think we've got a bit in the same direction there, but it's not quite the same, I think, as having an EU training body. So I think, I mean, that's something to take away and think about further, which is, we may need to help farmers more. It's obviously very much part of everything we're doing, for example, on the move to away from chemical pesticides and so on. But I think, you know, the idea of an EU training body is something we need to take away and think about.
Okay, thank you, Dirk. Let's look at the call to action 2, define uniform EU nutrition and labelling guidelines which are easy and accessible. Now, I mean, you obviously have a lot of interaction with producers, with labellers, with packagers. There sounded to me amongst some of our younger generation some doubt about the efficacy of this sort of Nutri-Score labelling that we have at the moment. Where do you think there might be room for improvement? Where are the challenges in getting an entire industry to all sing from the same hymn sheet, as it were?
This has proven to be a very complicated area, and we've been dealing with it for a very long time. It certainly sounds very appealing to have a uniform set of guidelines across the EU, and certainly when it comes to labeling, we are a big proponent of it. However, at the same time, you need to recognize that when it comes to nutrition and diets, we are consuming foods and drinks differently throughout the EU. The way you eat a yogurt in Sweden might be different than the way you eat a yogurt in Spain, for instance. And that's why things get complicated. I think we need to embrace diversity in diets as a starting point, and then see where we can communicate more clearly about common principles that unite all dietary approaches. And what you in the end want is that information gives everyone the same tool to make their own individual choices that fit within their own personal diets. And in policy discussions, we tend to be very focused on individual foods. This food gets an A or an E or a green or a red, or individual ingredients that are spelled out. But in the end, most of the foods we consume, we are combining those in a meal, which we consume perhaps on several different occasions. I cook for the day after and I use it for my lunch, or I eat it in a different portion because I'm coming home late and I don't want to eat so much anymore. So I think we need to also take a little bit of step back from this discussion and think, how do we want to inform consumers in a context of the reality that they are in today? And that's not necessarily only in supermarket foods, but it is also in restaurants. There's more out-of-home consumption. We at the moment don't have really information on non-prepacked foods or foods that are in restaurants and so forth. So that's a very challenging topic in itself. And then if you want to combine that with environmental information, it becomes even more complicated, because if you want to all integrate that into one single approach, you might see that there are some trade-offs that you make. Something might be environmentally friendly, but might not necessarily be healthy, and vice versa. So we still have a long way to go, but already having that push from the young generation that we need to look into that, and also their creativity, again, will be very instrumental to get that right.
Thank you. Now, the next is to develop an inclusion policy that considers the effect of regulations on food costs among vulnerable populations and the provision of vouchers for nutrient-rich foods. I heard a lot this morning about how different countries, if you like, consume differently. To take the two countries I know best, where my family lives, Malta has very limited, if you like, natural resources. It's very limited soil resources. And so most of its food is imported and packaged, compared to Ireland, which is one of the most self-sufficient, food sufficient in the world. Europe is broad, Claire. How do you think we can have these sort of nutrient-rich vouchers or concerns for vulnerable populations in all countries of the EU when there really isn't one size fits all?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think we have to be careful indeed on this one about trying to do one size fits all. We've been looking at mainstreaming inclusion throughout what we do. And if you look at the Farm to Fork policy, it talks about a just and inclusive transition. And of course, all the way along the food supply chain, we've been conscious to make sure that the primary producers also get their just remuneration, and at the end that we have an affordable food for consumers. I think one thing we have to do at European level is look when we come with new policies, and I think this is in the recommendation that's made there, we should look at what the impact of the new policy is across stakeholders and make sure that those who may be the most vulnerable are taken into account. But I think I go back to what you said at the beginning, that this is something in particular, for example, providing vouchers and so on, is something that needs to be done at member state level. It needs to be done at regional, even on local level. And I think that that's one of the challenges we have going ahead in terms of what we do on Farm to Fork, how we bring all those different levels together. I think we've been very good at identifying that we need to work all the way along the food chain, but perhaps what we haven't done so well is looking at different levels and how they can all work together. So you're absolutely right that on this one size doesn't fit all. And we need to work with member states and the regional and local levels to get something that works in the member states individually.
But Claire, do you think there might be a possibility to set, if you like, a baseline that all member states should aim for, some sort of key performance indicators?
Sure, I think we can look at that, but I would be careful about being too specific. I mean, what we want, of course, is a minimum level. And when we look at, I mean, if you go to nutrition, And I think that point was being made earlier as well. I mean, the point was being made by Dirk about the fact that you don't just take a product, you have a whole menu, etc. And of course, different countries have different ideas about how you should put menus together. They have different standards on nutrition. They have different cultures. They have different ways of putting food together. But yet we've still, I think, in the Farm to Fork strategy said that we want to be looking at everybody to be moving towards a balanced, and that means a more plant-based diet and having less red meat, for example. We've done that in a very cautious way, but I think what we've tried to do is take account of the fact that there are differences, but nonetheless, in the way that you're suggesting, go ahead towards having an improvement across the board within Europe.
Dirk, the next point is to develop an EU-wide true cost of food policy. I was quite struck by how passionate they were, our speakers in the previous panel, about this question of true cost of food. It's not something the average consumer necessarily thinks about when they walk into a shop to buy something. They think, I need this to eat now, or I need this for tomorrow. It's a tricky one to know how much information is information overload and how much is pertinent.
Yeah, the true cost of food discussion is a very interesting one, and also a very tricky or complex one, as you said. And we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg at the moment. So we're starting to have a better understanding of what that could imply. Obviously, the principle of accounting the externalities that are associated to food, that sounds logical. And today, consumers are not necessarily paying the right price for the food that they are buying today. But there are some important aspects that you need to take into account, and we need to consider when you, especially when you tinker with prices. I think it's important that this true cost of food needs to be calculated throughout the entire life cycle of products. So from the growing of the raw materials down to consumption. And there you can see that, for instance, sometimes you come to surprises. Locally produced food might not necessarily always be more sustainable, and therefore there will be some price changes there. I think, secondly, food can also have positive as well as negative impacts on the environment, on health, and on well-being of people. I think that is also another thing that we need to consider. How do we integrate, but besides the cost, also the positive value of food in people's lives? And another question is, how do you operate that, or how does the market operate in practice? So who will reap the benefits or the rewards for making investments in sustainability? Who will have to bear the costs? And are consumers willing to pay more for their food? And how do we make sure that we don't create more inequalities in all of that? Looking at affordability and particularly vulnerable groups, as was said by the FutureFoodMakers. I think we need to make sure that the food prices are also not rising too much. Now with COVID-19, with the energy prices rising, with raw material costs rising, we will see probably more food price increases, which are inevitable. And it's not sure that consumers will all be very appreciative of that. So we need to look at it and have a better understanding of that concept, but certainly very interesting in itself.
Well, Claire, this true cost of food is something that also feeds very much into the next element, which is about tackling food waste in supermarkets, but I suppose tackling food waste in general. Now, tell me a little bit where you see the interlinkage between these two calls to action and what the EU, in practical terms, the European Commission and DG Sante could even do to sort of encourage supermarkets to be responsible and pay their part.
Okay, so I think on this food waste, what was very interesting is that the FutureFoodMakers were proposing an evidence-based approach, which I think is necessary because obviously we have to get some figures out there on this and see how we can measure what's going on. So we, in the Farm to Fork strategy, the Commission had confirmed the commitment towards this global target of halving food waste by 2030. And to reduce food losses along the production and supply chain. So one of the things that we're looking at now, and we'll come with a proposal in 2023, is indeed to put this target into law, to be very specific about it. We will set it so we will try and reduce by half by 2030. We will set a baseline. We've been trying for a few years now to set out a common methodology, which I think now is moving into place, which will help us to do the measurements. But of course, and I'm looking at Dirk here, this is not something that the Commission is going to be able to do with a magic wand and just by putting the figure into law. This is going to mean a lot of hard work with industry in terms of how we can look all the way along the chain. One thing that we've looked at is this question of date marking on food, because we think that quite a lot of food is being wasted because of the date marking, because of misunderstandings around date marking, the use by and the best before. So we're working on that, and we'll come with proposals on that too. And we're looking, I think we're going to need some pretty targeted measures to address specific issues, or we might call them hotspots, let's say, which can vary according to business operators and national situations. One thing that I mentioned right at the beginning I want to come back to is the Code of Conduct on Responsible Food Business and Marketing Practices, which is something that we worked on with Food Drink Europe, and we now have, I think it's over 100 companies and associations that have signed up to the code. And the actions in there include putting into scorecards reduction of waste, food donation, and provision of information on the date marking and what we call the valorization of side streams. We're taking that and we're putting it into our platform on food loss and waste, where we work with all the stakeholders so we can take the best practice and see what to do. So I think the short answer to your question is we will come with to make the targets legally binding, but in the meantime, we're working very intensely with industry to see what we can do to try, and the member states as well, to try and improve the situation. So I think the proposal on this was spot on, and thank you for making it so evidence-based as well, because that's really helpful, I think, in terms of measuring what's going on here and making a difference.
Dirk, I want you to comment on this food waste issue as well, because I think the final call to action we can almost take as read. No one disagrees with providing better education and information to kids. But to stay with the food waste, obviously industry has got to play a big part in this. How do you make a business case for saying your product should be on the shelf longer and not be thrown away when that may mean that fewer units are sold?
Well, I think if it's in everyone's interest, including industry and business, to reduce and prevent food waste. And if you look at it in relation to the greenhouse gas emissions, about 6 to 8% of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced if we stop wasting food. And we are in the middle part of the chain talking mostly about food loss. So reducing food loss can, in factories, in our operations, can increase efficiencies. So economically, it makes perfect sense. Even towards consumers, if consumers reduce their waste at home, this is only in the interest of companies. But the main point is that food waste reduction and prevention is also a major tool to reduce and decarbonize the food systems, and that is certainly to the industry's interest, because the industry is the first victim of climate change. Food and agriculture will be first hit when temperatures are rising and raw material will not be available anymore. So it is certainly in the interest of the industry to also reduce food waste, food loss, and thereby also contribute to reductions of emissions in the world. So hope that answers your question. And I think maybe last point to make on that is that we are investing heavily in innovative solutions when it comes to ingredients, but also when it comes to packaging. So you will see more smart packaging, more sustainable packaging. And there, when you talk, for instance, about bringing the food from the supermarket to your homes to avoid that the products turn bad and so forth. But we also need to invest more in sustainable solutions and innovative solutions that are not there yet today. And that's, again, where I think I see the FutureFoodMakers call really as a signal that we need to step up activity in that field particularly. And we also rely on their expertise and their drive, let's say, and creativity to find solutions, which is not an easy journey, but we need to do that together.
Well, we've really done a whistle-stop tour through all those 6 calls to action. Briefly, there is, of course, a call to include nutritional, health and environmental implications of food in educational curriculums for children. Of course, Claire, you're not from DG Education, and that's a national competency anyway, but presumably you support such a call where it can be delivered.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And we have something which is called the EU School Scheme, which our colleagues from DG Agri deal with. But we are modifying that to try and improve the contribution to sustainable food consumption and strengthen some of the messages there on healthy nutrition, sustainable food production coming through. Indeed, as you said, we don't develop the education curricula, but of course we would call on the national, regional and local stakeholders to take account of this important recommendation.
Thank you. So wrapping up thoughts on both of you, Dirk, what's your takeaway? If you could only pick one of those 6 that you could say industry could really deliver on this, what would it be?
Well, we have to deliver on all of those, obviously. We cannot work in isolation. And that's what I like about this menu. It's very interconnected. And I think the last one, education, underpins it all, because it starts with making sure that the messages, the information, the communication is right, has a solid basis, but is also sort of taking away some of the misperceptions that exist. And that's where we as an industry have also a role to play, to be more transparent about the way we produce, how we produce, why we make certain choices for ingredients or for certain processes. And I think we actually have to look at ourselves to improve that. And we need to look at the young people, the generation that has the future, to also see through that nuance that exists, that complexity that sometimes is there when you talk about nutrition and food and diets. And I think we need to maybe jointly step up that effort, maybe collaborate in that space more. And I'm certainly open also particularly for the future food makers to engage in further conversations on that, to see what we can do together.
Well, thank you, Dirk. Claire, I'm sure you want to talk to the future food makers as well. I know the Commission has put out this commitment to evidence-based policy making and citizen-driven initiatives as well. But I'll give you carte blanche to pick up whatever you want for your final remarks.
Okay, thanks very much, Jennifer. I would like to, just one mention on labelling, because I didn't say anything on that. You asked Dirk to speak to that one. But one message that I heard very clearly there from the future food makers was the one about sustainable labelling. So we are working obviously on the nutrition labelling. We hope to improve on what's out there at the moment. We're also working on sustainable labelling. So I heard them very clearly saying, we don't just want to know about nutrition, we want to know about the environmental footprint of our food and so on. So this confirms to me that something which is may take a bit of time from our side, but that there is really a desire for that out there. I think I would just like to say a big thank you to them for their new ideas, their different perspectives. We as policymakers, I think, have to listen. You've made us sit up, stand up and listen, because you are so clear about what you want for the future. You are so operational. You've been so specific about what we need to do. So we've heard you. We're all part of the solution going forward. And I would simply just encourage you to keep using your voices in this way. Be active, as you said you would. I'll hold you to that promise that you will keep active on this. And please be part of that change that we all want to see. Thank you.
Dirk, Claire, thank you very much. You've done an amazing job to tackle so much in such a short time frame. I wish we could be doing this in person this year, but hopefully next year we will be able to. Take care, and thank you to our speakers. Coming up, we've got a longer break for you. You can, of course, take advantage of all the networking tools on the platform, or, of course, go stretch your legs, because this afternoon we will come back at 2:05 Brussels time with the breakout sessions. This afternoon, there will be 5 breakout sessions. The first round will be 3 happening at 2:05, and then later on there will be 2 others. Breakout session 1 is on stage A, and that is sustainable food labeling. Session 2, if you're interested in sustainable agriculture, soil purpose, indeed tackling regenerative transition, that is on breakout stage B. Session 3 is HoReCa, the future of the HoReCa sector, economic, social, and environmental sustainability. That will be on breakout stage C. So those are your first 3 breakout sessions starting at 2:05 and continuing until 3:45. Then we have sessions 4 and 5 starting at 3:30. We will have targeted nutrition, the future of personalized nutrition. That will be on breakout stage B, and the circular food systems will be on breakout stage C. So you go through your first 3 sessions, pick which one you want. They are simultaneous. And then the last 2 sessions also simultaneous. You can pick which one of those you want to attend. I'm sure we will have a slide up to tell you where to go and to direct you to the session of your choice. Remember that we want you to keep sharing these thoughts with your colleagues, with the wider public. Please keep using the hashtag FutureFood21 and enjoy the sessions. Really get as much out of them as you can. But have a great break now. We'll see you in about an hour.